I've always prided myself on being the kind of mother who listens. Not just to words, but to silences, to the pauses between thoughts, the things left unsaid in doorways and under breath. Russell was never an easy child to read, even when he was small. His quiet was not empty but filled with observation, like he was always collecting the world in pieces and filing it somewhere no one could touch. He's 20 now. Back home for a semester off college after what he called an academic free fall. No dramatic failure, just a slow slipping away. From structure. From interest. From pretending everything made sense to him. We never talked much about the specifics. Just that he needed space. Needed quiet. And perhaps, needed me. I rearranged my life around that unspoken need, reworked my office hours, filled the kitchen with his favorites, took long walks in the evening just in case he wanted to follow and talk. Most nights he didn't. But when he did, the air between us hummed with something I couldn't name. One evening in late October, I found him sitting on the floor of the living room, surrounded by records he hadn't touched in years. The kind of albums we used to play on Saturday mornings when he was little, twirling in pajamas on the hardwood floors while I cooked. "You're resurrecting the dead," I said softly, kneeling beside him. He looked up, smiling, not with his mouth, but with that particular gleam in his eyes. I missed the way music sounded before streaming ruined it. I sat beside him, cross-legged, our knees almost touching. "You missed a lot of things." He didn't answer right away, just slipped a record from its sleeve and placed it on the player. It crackled to life, a jazz melody soft and slow filling the room. Then, quietly, "Yeah." We listened in silence, letting the song say what neither of us could. And when it ended, he said, "You ever think people fall in love with the wrong versions of each other?" The question hit me like a ripple under still water. "All the time," I said. "Sometimes, we don't even know the right version until we've lost the wrong one." Russell glanced at me, eyes dark and searching. "And what if we never find someone who loves the true one?" "You will," I said automatically, but something in my voice faltered. He must have heard it. "You don't sound convinced," he said, a wry smile tugging at his mouth. I hesitated, brushing a speck of dust from the record cover. "I think, sometimes we grow used to being misread. It becomes comfortable. Safer than risking being truly seen." He leaned back on his elbows, head tilted toward me. "Have you ever felt truly seen?" A long pause. Then, quietly, "Not in a very long time." The song shifted. The room grew dimmer. He didn't move closer, not physically, but something in the air between us narrowed. "You should be," he said. "Seen, I mean." I looked at him then, really looked. He wasn't the boy I had raised, not anymore. There was a steadiness to his gaze, a gentleness I hadn't known how to name until now. Not attraction, not desire, not yet, but a tender curiosity that felt like standing on the edge of something both beautiful and forbidden. "Russell," I said, my voice barely above the music, "you're young. You're still figuring out your place in the world. These feelings." "I'm not talking about feelings," he interrupted, though his tone remained soft. "I'm talking about understanding. And you're the only person who's ever really tried to understand me." I didn't know what to say. So I reached for his hand. Just for a moment. Just long enough to let him know I was there. That I heard him. That I felt it too, whatever it was. He squeezed my hand gently and then let go. The music continued, the silence between the notes louder than ever. The days that followed passed with the kind of quiet only late autumn can bring, when the trees begin to bare their bones and the wind moves like breath across the windows. Russell spent more time downstairs. Not talking, always, but near. His presence threaded through the house like a note held at the edge of hearing. I began to find him in odd places. By the back porch, staring out into the fog that gathered along the fence line. In the kitchen at 2 a.m., making tea and listening to symphonies on low volume. Once, I woke to find a blanket draped over my legs. He must have seen me doze off in the armchair and covered me before retreating quietly upstairs. It was in those moments, the unseen kindnesses, that I started to feel something stirring. A warmth, yes. But also a disquieting sense of being noticed in a way that had long since faded from my world. One evening, I returned from work later than usual. The house was dim, golden with lamplight. Russell was curled on the couch with a book, legs stretched out, one hand absently stroking the back of our old cat. He looked up as I entered, and the expression on his face, that flicker of relief, of attention, made my heart do something unfamiliar. "I made dinner," he said, standing. "Just soup and grilled cheese. Thought you might be hungry." It was simple. But it wasn't. We sat across from each other, the light above the table casting soft halos around our dishes. He watched me eat, not in an intrusive way, but with a sort of quiet investment that made me set my spoon down more than once just to steady myself. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Just tired." He tilted his head. "But not the kind sleep fixes." I looked up at him. And something unspoken passed between us again, recognition, maybe. Or the ache of being understood too clearly. That night, after the dishes were done, he surprised me. "Want to go for a drive?" he asked, already reaching for his coat. "Now." "Why not?" And for reasons I couldn't name, I said yes. The roads were empty, the town curled into itself. He didn't play music. Just kept the windows cracked enough to let the cold in, so the silence between us could breathe. We drove until we reached the lake, dark and still as obsidian, the reflection of stars trembling on its surface. He parked and killed the engine, leaving us wrapped in hush and shadow. I hugged my coat tighter. "I haven't been here in years." "You used to bring me here," he said, not looking at me. "After Dad left. We'd sit on the dock and you'd tell me that still water holds more than it shows." I smiled faintly. I was trying to be poetic. "You were being honest," he said. "Even then." He turned toward me, face barely lit by the distant moon. "I think that's why it's hard sometimes. You're the only one who's ever told me things without editing them for comfort." "I didn't know it meant that much," I whispered. "It does." A long silence. Then he reached over, slow, tentative, and brushed a loose strand of hair from my cheek. His fingers didn't linger. But the touch stayed with me. I turned my face away, heart pounding. "Russell," I said softly, "this closeness between us. We have to be careful." "I know," he replied. "But I don't want to lose it either." We didn't kiss that night. But later, as we sat on the edge of the dock, our shoulders touching in the cold, he rested his head gently against mine. I didn't move away. I let it happen. And when he whispered, "I don't know what this is," I answered truthfully. "Neither do I." But we both knew something had changed. It was Russell who suggested the cabin. He mentioned it offhand one evening, as we sat on opposite ends of the living room, pretending to be consumed by our respective books. "You remember that place in Vermont?" he asked, without looking up. I didn't have to ask which one. "My aunt's old cabin." "Yeah. She still rents it out." I closed my book. "Probably." "Why?" He shrugged. "No reason. Just thought it might be nice. To disappear for a while. Breathe." He didn't say with you, didn't have to. The idea nestled into me like a warm coal. At first I resisted, calling it impractical. But when I found myself looking up availability 2 days later, I realized the truth. I wanted to disappear too. If only for a weekend. When I told him it was booked, the light in his eyes startled me. We drove up that Friday. The air thinned as we rose into the hills, the roads narrowing until they were barely more than winding threads of gravel and pine. The cabin was exactly as I remembered, a modest wooden box tucked against a frozen lake, framed by bare trees and silence. Inside, it smelled of cedar and old firewood. There were no neighbors, no Wi-Fi, and only one bedroom. I hesitated, but Russell merely set our bags down and said, "We'll figure it out." That first night, we cooked together in the small kitchen, the radio crackling with static and half-tuned folk songs. We moved easily, almost too easily, passing utensils, brushing against each other in that tight space. The electricity of those touches didn't go unnoticed. Not by me. Not by him. After dinner, we curled up on the couch with tea, the fire crackling low. He threw a blanket across us both, casual, familiar. But his hand lingered on my knee for a beat too long before retreating. "I feel like I can finally hear myself think," he said, staring into the fire. "But what I hear scares me sometimes." I looked at him, watching the flicker of flame in his eyes. "Why?" "Because it sounds like you." I drew in a breath, the edges of my control fraying. "You don't know what you're feeling, Russell. You're young. You're still healing." "I'm not confused," he said, turning to me fully. "I know this isn't normal. I know it's complicated. But it doesn't feel wrong. Not in my bones." I reached for the mug in my lap, trying to center myself. "It's not about wrong. It's about consequence." "And what about truth?" he asked. "Doesn't that count for something?" We said nothing after that. Just stared into the fire, lost in separate spirals. The storm hit just after midnight. Wind howled through the trees, rain pelting the windows with furious rhythm. The power flickered out, and the cabin fell into darkness. I found him lighting candles, calm, steady, his silhouette etched in gold by the flames. "Come here," he said, offering a candle. We sat on the floor, backs against the couch, watching the shadows dance on the ceiling. Then came the lightning. A sharp crack that shook the walls. Instinctively, I reached for him, fingers closing around his wrist. He didn't move. "I'm here," he said, voice barely audible. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was alive. He turned toward me slowly, his hand coming up to brush a damp curl from my cheek. The flicker of candlelight painted his features in reverence. "Can I?" he began, and stopped. I didn't stop him. Our lips met in a kiss that wasn't rushed or reckless, just true. It held no lust, only the quiet ache of something long unspoken. His hand rested lightly at my neck, and I felt every beat of his pulse against my skin. When we pulled apart, I didn't speak. He didn't either. But he wrapped his arms around me, and I let him. Let myself lean into that warmth, that impossible comfort. We fell asleep there on the floor, wrapped in the hush of a world that had gone still. The next morning, neither of us spoke about it. But the silence had changed. It was no longer full of what-ifs. It was a promise we didn't yet understand. We returned from the cabin on a Tuesday that felt too ordinary. The clouds had thinned. The roads were dry. Our bags thumped lightly in the trunk as we drove back in silence, the radio playing soft, aimless jazz. It felt like we'd stepped out of time, and now, it was folding itself back around us. I caught Russell glancing at me once, not expectantly, not anxiously, but as if memorizing something. I didn't know what to do with that gaze, so I looked away. Back home, the house felt smaller. Less like a sanctuary and more like a witness. Everything had changed, and nothing had. I unpacked slowly, deliberately, spacing things out as if routine could dilute the storm still churning quietly beneath my ribs. That evening, we moved around each other with careful choreography. He made dinner, I cleaned up. No touch, no kiss, no word out of place. But when I handed him the dish rag and our fingers brushed, he didn't pull away. And neither did I. "Are we going to talk about it?" he asked later, his voice quiet but firm. I paused in the hallway, hand resting on the banister. "I don't know what to say," I admitted. "Nothing about this is simple, Russell." He stepped closer, not touching me but close enough that I could feel the heat of him. "I don't want simple," he said. "I just want real." I turned then, meeting his eyes. "And what if real costs us everything?" He held my gaze. "Then I guess we learn how to live without everything, but not without the truth." That night, we didn't kiss. But we sat close again, sharing stories from years we had skipped over. He told me about college parties he never enjoyed, girls he'd dated but never connected with. I told him about my silent battles, the nights I sat in my car for an extra hour just to avoid coming inside to a house too full of memory. It wasn't romance. It was intimacy. The kind that blooms slowly in the soil of understanding. The days that followed were delicate. We found ourselves drawn together again and again, on the porch in the cool morning light, in the kitchen while chopping onions, in the shared silence of the living room. Once, while laughing at a line in an old movie, he reached over and gently touched my knee. I froze. So did he. But I didn't move away. One evening, a week after our return, we walked the perimeter of the park as the sun fell in wide strokes across the grass. People passed us, joggers, mothers with strollers, couples. No one looked twice. No one knew. We stopped beneath an old sycamore, the air golden around us. Russell turned to me, voice low. "You don't have to decide anything. But I need you to know, what I feel isn't confused. Or a phase. It's the clearest thing I've ever known." I looked at him, every rational bone in my body trembling against the pull of something deeper. "Older." "I believe you," I said softly. And then, I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him. It wasn't a passionate kiss. Not a line crossed. Just an embrace. But one that lasted too long for either of us to pretend it was casual. He held me like I was gravity. And for a moment, I let myself be held. We parted gently. Later that night, as we sat on the front steps, the stars beginning to hum into view, I asked, "What do we do now?" Russell didn't answer right away. Just reached over and took my hand. "We keep walking," he said. "Even if we don't know where the road ends." And I realized, that was enough. Not every bond fits into language. Not every story is meant for the world. Some are meant for the space between notes. Where hearts speak in silence. And love, in its strangest form, quietly survives.